the guy raised the stuff on the floor. That's why he tripped over it.
That would be me, the class.
Unless you want to try to get it to go down.
So Crossy actually answered if you would.
Oh, fantastic.
I don't see any value in that. Then I might pump.
Just testing sound. Max, can you hear me?
Hi, Phil.
You can hear me? Right, we're all good to go?
All good.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to make a start. Welcome, everybody. It's so good to have you with us this morning. On behalf of Survey and Spatial New Zealand and LINZ, yeah, it's good to get together and have a chat about this exception process. Just letting you know, it's been extremely popular. We've had over 70 registrations, so welcome to everybody that's here, taking the time out of a busy day at the end of a busy year. So thanks for coming, and we hope that you find this enjoyable and informative. So my name's Phil Smith. I'm part of a new team that's formed in LINZ called a Spatial and Requests team. And we came into being on the 1st of July this year as a result of a redesign here at LINZ. Our team is mainly responsible for resolving things like exception request issues that you guys have, post-approval, adjustments of data sets, any other spatial edits to the Landonline data. That's our responsibility. And just up front here, I'd like to let you know that in the room with me is Sharon Woodward, who is our team manager, and Yvonne Grant, who is one of my colleagues. And in Hamilton, we've got Grant Finlay, who's one of our colleagues as well. And these folk will be looking at the questions that you submit as part of, through the Slido app. And if we can answer the questions during the session, we will, especially if they're of general interest to everybody. For the questions that we can't answer live, we will take offline and we'll reply to you afterwards. So make sure there's enough detail in those questions to allow us to contact you if that's needed. Firstly, also a big thanks to Max at Survey and Spatial for allowing us to host this webinar through their platform. Max has been a great help. Appreciate that. If you log on to slido.com, you'll see under the poll tab, there's a little question there asking about how familiar you are with the LINZ exception process. Yeah, we'd just like some feedback, I guess, even live now, just to find out if you have used it in the past, or you've never used it, or you use it regularly, or use it from time to time. So just take a moment, and if you haven't responded to that, please do, as it gives us good feedback as to the composition of our audience. Okay, so some of the topics that we're going to cover this morning is not that one. This is I must forward this by saying that this is the first session we're going to run in probably a series of sessions on the exception process, because we know it's a timely topic. It's a process that's been going around, been in action or been in existence for the last 10 years, and it's good to refresh it and discuss it. So we're going to go back to first principles today, explain where it came from, how the process works. We're going to show you some updated LINZ website information where we've collated everything together. And then we're going to have a look at some situations where, we'll discuss some situations where the exception process should not be used. Have a look at some recent examples. And then as you can see there, we're going to review some of the information that we need from you. Because it's text-based, as you know, it's very important that the detail we get back from you is comprehensive. So as we go through this session this morning, feel free to submit questions, and if we can answer them live, we shall. Okay, so a bit of background, just some brief points. That the exception process, which we'll call the process for short today, was created to assist users of Landonline who are creating survey data sets to resolve issues that they encounter during the survey capture process, and also issues that might prevent you going into plan generation or prevent submission. So fatal failures in the pre-validation tab, geometry errors and other errors that pop up when you encounter or try to open plan generation. So because of these roadblocks, it's necessary for us to have a process here at LINZ to support the survey industry to resolve these as quick as possible and allow you to get on with the work that you're doing. So we want to acknowledge firstly that some of these issues come from the fact that a fair bit of the data in Landonline has accuracy which is not up to survey standards. And that's due to its origin. A lot of the original data was digitized by hand off old maps and record sheets that we had at LINZ. And that was a quick and easy way of getting the digital data transferred from paper to the digital cadastral database. So some of that inaccuracy is still with us, which is why when you're in the e-survey space and you've come across errors or issues with data, it's just, yeah, something that's often not anticipated due to that accuracy. So these issues are outside the user's control. So it's up to us here at LINZ to respond to that and give you a mechanism for resolving it. So if you've used the system, you'll know that exception requests are created and sent from within the data set, as opposed to other requests which can be created one-off either from the workspace main window or from the request menu within the data set. For exception requests, the button's located in the pre-validation tab, just up in here on the main survey screen, and then the exception button is activated, which gives you access to the screen to create the comment. We're going to discuss towards the end of the session the kind of information which is really helpful to us in that comments field. So the process goes, when you click the request button, it creates a job in Landonline for us at the Spatial and Request team. The data set is locked in your user space and you can't touch it. These requests have a little bit more urgency around them. As you can see, we have a 24-hour turnaround time before they go red in our tray and tell us we should get on with it. The SRA staff, the survey, spatial and request, staff will amend Landonline and will give you a written explanation of what we've done to resolve that issue. But sometimes there are issues which we can't resolve, and some issues that we require extra help with, and we have our own Landonline application specialists who are well equipped to deal with some of the geometry errors and topology errors which you encounter, especially the ones going into plan generation or some of the fatal ones in pre-val. So they're behind us, and we escalate calls to them when we are unable to resolve them at the front end. And some of the issues that you'll find will get escalated straight to that team if you've rung the 0800 number to ask for help. What I want to cover now is the information on the website that has been updated or mainly collated together. We realise and acknowledge that sometimes it's difficult to find information on this website, and it can be all over the place. So in an effort to try and help you guys, we've collated as much of it together and we've added a little bit in there as well. So the easiest way to find it on the LINZ website is to enter the word exception in the main search screen at the top there, and then just click the search button, and I've actually got it set up so you guys can see it. So here's the website, pre-populated search. The search results come up with any page, of course, that's got reference to exception requests. The first one is like an index page to the exception information. This link here, the top one that says exception requests, this is where we've collated all the information related to exception requests, which should be your first port of call or one of the first ports. So a little brief introduction as to what the exception request is, and we won't go over that again. But we want to introduce to you a new concept, or it is for us anyway, that we're sort of dividing exception requests into two categories, and we call them reactive and proactive exceptions. And this comes from some feedback we've had as a result of our cadastral surveyors attending institute branch meetings and having feedback from yourselves and from surveyors saying that there are issues with using the exception request process because it's not always about resolving issues with Landonline. Sometimes there are issues that the user can see coming up and they need to be resolved. So we've split it out a little bit so that we acknowledge that there are some times when we need to react to an error or react to a situation that you've had, a roadblock. We just call it a roadblock. And then there's other instances where, due to your experience and knowledge of the data set, you know you're going to have an issue coming up, and it's good to sort that up front if we can. and that's what we call proactive exceptions. So I just want to spend a few minutes now just going through the different options and the different examples of what is a reactive exception, what is a proactive exception. So when we talk about reactive exceptions, this is the standard exception request where an error has popped up, or as a result of what you're doing, you can no longer proceed with the natural process in the e-survey space. We've attempted to add a few examples here, but this is by no means definitive. It should just give you an understanding of the types of things you might encounter. So the first one there is some of the reactive ones, of course, when you're attempting to access PlanGen and receive a geometry error message, and there are a couple of these which can appear either for new parcels or for, mainly for the new parcels that you've captured. Now, in most instances, we will be using our application specialists to resolve these, especially if you've called the 0800 team and you've told them what's going on. Often this relates to a capture issue due to something in the data. The next one there, when trying to link parcels, an error message indicates that multiple line IDs are in the underlying topology. Again, this is something that we may be able to fix as part of the exception process, or else it will be handled by our application specialists as well. But if you get this, by all means lodge an exception request, or as we've got on bold type down there, call the 0800 number in the first instance if you'd rather talk to somebody. When running pre-validation and you get a fatal topology error, there are two types here. One is for new parcels and one is for existing parcels. And we have different methods of fixing those. But again, this is reactive to an issue that's not something that you've created in your workspace, or unless it's a capture error. Now, when linking nodes, this is a common one. Some data is flipped on itself, and we see this a lot with thin easement parcels or big subdivisions that have many secondary parcels that are skinny. So we do see that, and you can't carry on, so you do need to have that sorted. You'll see there what to do if you encounter these issues. First step we advise is to call the 0800 number, especially if you need some guidance as to whether this is an exception request or whether it should be escalated to the application specialists for their attention. In any cases of doubt, give them a call. But if you're well familiar with the process, you know what happens and what you're seeing, then by all means use the exception process. And if we can't deal with it, we'll escalate it. There is a section in this web page here relating to what we call misconceptions. I'll go over that in a minute, because it's good to realize that there's some things that you can do for yourselves to help that resolve an issue. There's some issues that come up which don't require the exception process to be used. We'll look at that in a minute. So just going on from there, here's where we introduce the concept of a proactive exception. And this is where we want to acknowledge that people have been using, or some people have been using the e-survey system for a number of years now, well versed with what happens and what doesn't happen, and errors that might pop up. Been working in data sets long enough to know that something may happen due to an action that you're about to take, and that's something you don't want to see. Okay, so that's fine. And using the exception process to head off that issue at the pass is acceptable in some instances. We've got a list of examples here, which by no means definitive, but these are some of the issues that a proactive exception can be used for. The first one there, we've got missing boundary nodes from the underlying parcel. This can be broadened to say missing or inaccurate or incorrect nodes in the underlying parcel. And we don't mean the nodes that are potential missed marks that come up, not the mandatory ones, the potential ones. What we're talking about is where marks are missing from approved plans that should be in the database. Common example we see, especially in flat land, is where 4 parcels join at a point in Landonline and a single point, yet from the approved plans and the approved record, we can see there should be a step in the boundary. That makes it very difficult in the capture process for you, so we need to amend that. Water and irregular boundaries in Landonline that do not reflect this underlying survey definition. This is a big one, and this comes through a lot from you guys, from the survey industry. In fact, it's such an important topic. We've sidelined it a little bit today, and we're actually going to set up another session just dealing with water and irregular boundaries. So just bear that in mind as we come to, if you have any questions. We will touch on it briefly, but there are so many issues with irregular boundaries and water boundaries in Landonline, and absolutely accuracy is of an issue, especially if you're trying to adopt boundaries. So let's just park that one, and in the new year we'll set up another session and deal specifically with that. Okay, the next one there are significant distortions in the underlying cadastre due to incorrect capture by a previous survey or the quality of the original digital record. So this is to do with issues that can arise with even with our adjustment routine, where we adjust the cadastre from one direction and then we adjust the cadastre from another direction with 2 different plans, and your new survey stuck in the middle, and there ends up with a slight distortion in the boundaries, and then that needs to be dealt with. And often in those cases, we can deal with that using another adjustment. So yeah, there are issues like that. The rest of the examples down here, we won't go through them all, but I did want to highlight a few. And this, another point to mention about this documentation here is it is a dynamic document. We will be updating it from time to time. So I would suggest, if you use the exception process, bookmark this page and just keep an eye on it, because it is a work in progress and we are constantly revising the best use of this process so that it's more efficient for you. The second one there, Landonline nodes at either end of a water or regular boundary. I will touch on this one because it speaks to the distortion in Landonline. That is something that you definitely need us to sort, especially as we understand that a lot of people will digitize their irregular boundary in their third-party software and bring that in with the whole XML file. If it doesn't match, the extents of the new survey don't match Landonline, linking those ends will cause issues with the irregular boundary ending up right-lined in parts, so we don't want that. I want to talk and spend a bit of time talking about the last one, to remove significant amounts of distortion. This one probably causes the most consternation for people and is a source of quite a number of exception requests to us. And you might notice that we're beginning to, in some cases, push back on these, because this distortion is what we call a graphical distortion in the spatial window. And unless it causes a geometry error of the data, and as long as there are a one-to-one relationship with the new nodes to the old, we will not be moving boundaries to match the capture. We allow the process to go its natural course, link up the marks. Yes, the new data will be distorted in the spatial screen in Landonline, but this is temporary. The plan generation software, provided it opens fine, has its own adjustment routine built within it. And that adjustment routine respects your captured data and massages everything back out to show your captured data in its correct position. So the distortion, which we call graphical distortion in the spatial window, only stays around until the dataset is approved, after which time we will run a network adjustment and adjust Landonline to respect what you've got. So in summary of this, things to be aware of with looking at distortion is, do I have an existing node in Landonline? It may not be in the right place, but do I have one that matches the angle that I'm wanting to link? If I do, link it. Don't worry about the distortion, but we do understand that sometimes distortion causes issues with data, especially with thin parcels flipping over, or as I said, with the irregular boundaries, squashing an irregular boundary and creating right lines. So distortion needs to be significant enough to either cause thin parcels to slip or flip, or regular boundaries to be right lined. We don't want that. So yes, by all means, ask us to have a look at it. In any case, unsure, ring the 0800 team in the first instance and get some guidance from them. But just wanted to highlight this thing of graphical distortion being temporary. And don't be surprised if we push back and say, oh, please go ahead and link this. It will be sorted after approval. Happy to take questions on this if you've got it. Okay, I've asked the folk here just to pass me questions from time to time if they're going to be generally of good value to everybody. This one's a good one. The question was, what is the LINZ response time between reactive and proactive requests? And the answer is a simple no time difference whatsoever. We treat them all equally. Thank you for that question. Right, moving on. I'll go back to... So just want to highlight some other request types while we're here that can be used for dealing with correction in the database. So survey information complex, you may be well aware of this one, can be used for definition or interpretation questions as opposed to getting something fixed. Our LINZ technical advisors attend to these. Then there's the amend cadastral data request, which is a handy one, but we recommend this be used to fix data that is spatial or aspatial in nature, where the issue doesn't concern your current survey. So basically, it's not urgent. It's not like fixing an error, to allow the survey to be lodged. It's less urgent than that, but you've spotted something in the database that is incorrect, and we need to know about it. So amend cadastral data is the request type for that. The LINZ technical advisors will attend to these, and if there is a spatial component, they'll send it to our SRE team. The third one there is if you happen to be logged in Landonline using an eSearch Plus license rather than the firm's eSurvey license, then you can still ask us to fix things in the spatial window using the spatial correction request from the search screen. Anything that you find in the spatial window that's incorrect, we'll fix that. Either the technical advisors or the SRA team. So just wanted to highlight those three. Right, I'd like to move on now and spend quite a bit of time looking at some recent examples, and I'm sure you'll be interested in these. So firstly, I just wanted to say that the examples are real. They're ones that we've dealt with in the last 2 to 3 weeks. I don't want to identify anybody as being the origin of these, so it's not good nor bad. I just wanted to use these as excellent examples of what we can see, what we would like to see, and how we can help in these particular situations. So just give an overview of the types of things that we're seeing and how we've dealt with them. Right, the first one, and I'm going to be flicking between the PowerPoint presentation and some screenshots on the hard drive, so just bear with me as the screen changes. I didn't put this up for you to read it all. I put this one up as an example of the type of information that does come in, which is extremely helpful to the SRA team or anybody else that's dealing with these, where the person has explained what they're creating, which marks they've got linked for us, what's happening with the underlying boundaries. In this case, the third question here, the third paragraph, sorry, is where all the underlying parcels and road boundaries are not where they should be. And then they've gone on to explain how they've adopted them, how they've created the definition, which we don't need a complete survey report in this case, but having notes like this is extremely helpful for us to work out, yeah, okay, the definition is solid. We need to go back to these plans and use them to correct the database. And if I show you what that looked like, I hope everybody can see this. The screenshots are a little bit dodgy, but hopefully it's clear that you can see the road formation and where the easement, in this case a secondary parcel, is intended to bisect the road boundary at the northern end and the southern end. And the surveyor in this case, or the person doing the e-survey data set, has given us a lot of good information as to where that road should be, and with the outcome being that our SRA person has amended the data using the underlying plans mentioned and comparing with the cadastre, and that leaves us with this situation here. Yeah, which is exactly what's required. So the point to take away from this is the information that you provide us is crucial to our understanding of the situation and our analysis and resolution of the situation. So this is a thumbs up to that person. Here's another one. I won't read it all out, but this is an interesting case of a mark that's missing in the cadastre. The surveyor has explained very clearly where the mark is intended to be from the plans, and have also advised us that there is actually an existing node in the database. However, it's sitting there as a DCDB node. Now, DCDB nodes, just for background, are not rubbish in every instance. Some of them were put in the original DCDB database from vectors, but with the conversion into Landonline, those vectors never came across, and neither did the mark names. So just because a mark is called DCDB doesn't mean it has no value. It's always good to go back to the plans to see whether that node is of value. In this case, we have a node that was put in there that is in the database called DCDB, but it's actually in the wrong position. I'll show you some screenshots. So it's a little bit fuzzy, but I'll just zoom in. So the surveyor has, in the definition, has determined there's an angle in this boundary, which is correct, and you can see it mirrored on the other side, and correctly asked us to put in an angle in this boundary here. They went a step further and said there is actually an existing node on this boundary, and we can see it right up the top here, and have identified for us that the node is not actually a survey mark, which was really, really helpful. This is the kind of investigation that we would need to do in this case. When we are asked to create angles and boundaries, we do look to see if there are existing nodes in the area and whether or not they are survey points or they are DCDB without vectors points. In this case, we've got a mark that we can use, and the person, the SRA, was able to literally just move that node into position. And we ended up with this situation. So you can just see clear, just see a bit faintly under there's an orange circle. So that's a good resolution. Puts an angle in the boundary and gives the node for the survey to link to. This is another request which is fairly regular for us. Surveyor subdividing a parcel that is held in the database as a multi-polygon parcel. Multi-polygon parcels have come about from a project in Wellington that has been taking parcels and joining them together where they're held in the same title. And that's super useful for our legal and title staff. However, if you are dealing with a land parcel under survey, of course you don't need to deal with every parcel in that multi-polygon parcel. So a legitimate exception request in this instance is please split up the parcel. And you can see in pink on the right hand side that the The main parcel is RS 37447, as is the little portion across the river. So, and in this case, it's pretty clear and pretty simple for us to go into our system and create separate parcels. Where we can keep the current user parcel ID for you to extinguish, we will. Sometimes we have to make the old parcel historic and create new ones. This one here is touching on the distorted data issue, and one instance where it is legitimate and absolutely correct to ask us to look at it. And I'll show you the before and after shots of this one. Okay, so this survey is partially captured, completely captured and unlinked, which is also quite useful. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's some distortion up in the top, but that's actually not an issue for the majority of the parcel. What we do have here is some secondary parcels coming down this roadside, and down, the screenshot doesn't quite go all the way to the bottom, but you can see some secondary parcels down the bottom as well. And just in the corner here is one example of where linking the mark would probably cause an issue with the black primary parcel boundaries crossing over the new secondary parcel boundaries. So the person who has captured this has obviously tried to link, and they've said they have, and that's causing the parcels to flip. So that's not acceptable. When this comes to us, some of the things that we look at is, are there any vectors from previous approved plans along this boundary? Or are these lines and nodes just parcel lines with no vectors? If there are vectors, the situation becomes a little bit more complex for us. We need to incorporate those vectors into an adjustment and run an adjustment in order to move the nodes. If, however, the nodes are just parcel lines and nodes, then we have a bit of flexibility to move them in order to stop that flipping for you, which what we did this case. And the response was, because the narrow easement parcels linking would cause geometry errors, the nodes have been moved. And we have this scenario. Oop, sorry, it's really big, but I should zoom out a little bit. Hang on. Yep. So it looks much better. And they've also attended to the distortion at the top. Right, better move on. So another couple. All right, this one here, I just put in as an example of inadequate wording in the request. Can you please line up the road and stream, please, with my data? And when you see the plan, you'll know why it's inadequate. It's okay. So this is a really complex plan showing both sides of the stream. We have some good calculated fixes and adopted fixes from what appear to be from the plans. We have some marks that are linked up with the pink circles being the SDC accurate marks. What we don't have in the request is, where does that stream definition come from? Are the fixes that are placed in there new ones that have been created as part of the survey, or are they adopted from field notes? What is the basis for us moving that data? Because the definition of irregular boundaries cannot be just moved around to suit capture, because we're not sure at this end whether we're talking about accretion and erosion or a better fix of an adopted boundary and things like that. So this is one of the reasons why the information that you give us in the request is crucial to us understanding where the lines that you want us to use come from and why we should be respecting them, especially with the regular water boundaries where it can appear to have a big impact on the cadastre. So, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to dedicate a session to these because it's worth spending the time explaining the different types of water boundaries, how we deal with them through the exception process, and the kinds of situations you might encounter. In this case, the SRA staff member actually went, I think, possibly above and beyond here, but kudos to them. They actually went to the plans and worked out for themselves where this river boundary comes from, how it's defined, and it matches up with capture, and therefore they've gone and amended Landonline. So, but if this kind of data was in the request, we would be able to move it through a lot quicker. And they've spent a lot of time adjusting the data, because we basically have to digitize again the new boundary based on screenshots we take of the captured data here. I know these examples might raise a few questions. Feel free to send them in. How are we going? Right. Okay, this one here is a proactive request in terms of the way we responded to it. And the request was to have some underlying nodes added or updated. And it's basically to do with spatial distortion, but I'll just show you the before and after shots. Okay, so in this case, the surveyor appears to be redefining this river boundary, and looks like one of our Canterbury braided rivers. And what they've asked us to do is, in one part of the request, is to move some nodes down off screen. But they've also asked us to split the irregular boundary where the areas of accretion and erosion are up here and up here. And let me just go back to the slide. Oh yeah, can we also get the underlying boundary updated or broken as to what we have calculated? So this was the screenshot we were looking at before. They wanted the stream boundary split here and here where the crossover is. But we had an issue initially with this data set because none of the marks were linked. And this brings up another point with exception requests. If your data set is in terms of GD2000, we need at least one mark linked in Landonline and the data refreshed in the spatial screen before the exception request is raised. If the plan is in terms of OCD, we need at least two nodes linked up in order to place the data. So anyway, that's the first response. The second response I've put in full here. This is for this water boundary issue because it highlights an issue with capture when dealing with accretion and erosion or type of issues. There is a common understanding that we need to, or we often get questions for us to split the boundaries so that the new and the old can be represented. But in cases like this, there's no need to split the existing regular boundary because of the change in definition. The land under survey becomes the hydro parcel as well, and it needs to be resolved by being extinguished and the balanced parcel process kept used. I don't think I've got a screenshot of that, but I'll just go back to this one. So in this case here, we wouldn't split the irregular boundary anywhere, but the surveyor needed to extinguish this whole parcel and create a balanced hydro parcel to deal with the rest that is not affected by the change in definition. This is quite a common question, and again, it's something that we'll pick up when we do the irregular boundary seminar next year. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions here which I'd like to go through. In the narrow overlapping easement examples, would adding a placeholder work so that we can avoid an exception request? And that's a brilliant question. Thanks for that. Placeholders are there for a reason. They are there to help minimize distortion. The only problem with placeholders is that they interfere with the adjustment process in the plan gen system. Basically, if I remember correctly, it treats them like a fixed mark. So you can actually end up with geometry issues in the plan gen system when using placeholders, especially for large areas of distortion. For small areas of distortion, it may be possible to use one or two, but if you go beyond the one or two, then you really need to consider the best approach for that, and it would be best to actually raise an exception request to have the Landonline spatial data amended. So placeholders are there for a reason, but it gets to a point where if you need to use them too many times, they can create issues on their own. But the odd one is probably going to be okay. And this question here, do we have a portal here at LINZ where good examples of exception requests are stored, like the ones we've shown today? We just want to say thank you for that. Not at this stage we don't, but this is a brilliant idea going forward. And as I say, this page, the page and the information on the LINZ website is dynamic, so we'll keep that question. Thank you for submitting that. Right, moving on. So I want to show one more. Okay. This is an example of a request we had to move things to minimize distortion. And when the staff member looked at it and realized that actually there are enough nodes around here to honor the angles created by the new survey, and they really can be just linked up. But there was an issue here, I probably can't, where I might be able to. Yeah, Landonline's got two nodes really close together, and actually there's a third one just above there on the line. And so linking these marks would have created an issue for the underlying parcel. So it was necessary in this case to actually do a bit of editing in the database. But if that situation wasn't present, it would be just a case of the user linking it up, allowing the distortion to remain in the spatial screen here, and then leaving it to the approved, the post-approval adjustment to deal with the shape in Landonline. As I mentioned earlier, the plan generation system has its own adjustment routine and would respect the vectors and marks captured in the survey. And one other one, which is an interesting situation that we do get. Let's go back out of here. All right, so this is a survey where a surveyor has correctly used the survey information complex when dealing with a piece of land that adjoins the sea. And they've come back and they've been advised to extinguish the underlying hydro parcel and create a balance. And the question was, can you please split the existing hydro parcel so the balanced hydro parcel is more manageable? Fair question. When we pulled this up and had a look at it, initial response is, wow, that hydro parcel is huge. But when we looked at it more, we realized that actually a balanced parcel over this area would be absolutely acceptable, because the number of lines along the coast, the number of nodes, is actually not that great. The process would take 10, 15 seconds, and yes, it would include all those lines in the data set. But the point I wanted to make here is that in any balanced parcel dataset or dataset using balanced parcels, you have to create your diagrams as user-added diagrams. Anyway, you can't use the system-generated diagram, and any user-created diagram is going to, by rights, exclude the majority of that balanced parcel. So it doesn't matter whether we split it, make it smaller, or leave it as it is. You still have to, as a user, create a diagram that's going to exclude most of any balanced parcel we create. So as long as the balanced parcel isn't too long with too many lines in it and nodes, like you wouldn't want to do a balanced parcel on the Waitemata Harbour. At the far reaches of the harbour, there's too many parcels adjoining it. But something like this, where it's manageable, just have a go. Use the balanced parcel process, and then create the diagram in nice and close. It's the same with legalisation datasets. I hope that little point's helpful. Right. I wanted to just cover off a couple more things, and I have just go back to the website. Just to cover off misconceptions. Okay, so on the website we've got a section here that just briefly highlights some examples where you think you need an exception request, but you don't. And firstly, I understand that for some people this is new, and that's fine, and that exception requests are something that people try to use to get quick answers for other situations. That's not really the idea. So we will push back on those. That's survey information complex requesters for those types of questions. Okay, so if you're after general capture advice, and you're not going to get it through the exception process, we'll always ask you to ring 0800 survey, so you might as well do that in the first instance. If you've got a definition issue, as I said, use the survey information complex request. To amend errors and omissions in the cadastre, for example, parcels created on diagrams on transfer not shown. Yeah, this is the same, where unless it's actually part of your survey, it's stopping you going forward, an amend cadastral data set is the most appropriate thing to use. The third point there comes up from time to time, where we get asked in the exception process, please create a residue parcel for a limited title survey. And this is not required. Because the residue parcel by rights is the balance left over of the land after you've done your definition, it's perfectly acceptable and correct to create another parcel in your survey for that residue. It may need calculating between adopted coordinates for a line fix and finding out, doing a bit of investigation into the appellation because you have to go back to the first appellation, but it's okay. It's right to create a residue parcel as part of the new survey. To update boundaries in terms of a new survey fix or better fix of a water boundary to exclude erosion. We're going to deal with that next time. When Landonline has extra or missing nodes along a roadside, these will be optional blue nodes that should not be selected. Okay, so we'll leave that as well. But just consult this website. I've got a question here which I'd like to share as well. Am I right in thinking that we are meant to unlink everything except one mark before submitting the request? And the answer is absolutely. And please perform a spatial refresh on the window before you submit it as well. The reason is that adding data, editing data, after you've done your XML import, and even linking a number of marks will cause a distortion graphically. This distortion is held until you either release it by unlinking the nodes and refreshing it, or the post-approval adjustments. So yes, what we would ask is, we kind of mentioned this before, if your survey is in terms of GD 2000, one mark is the minimum for linking. If it's OCD, then 2 marks is the minimum for linking. And then everything else can be unlinked and is refreshed, and that gives us the best view of what you've seen. Thank you for that question. Right, time is moving on. The second to last bullet point there under misconceptions, until all fatal errors in the pre-validation report have been addressed. Some fatal errors can be dealt with in other ways, so not necessarily through the exception process. In any case, any doubt, please ring the 0800 number. Right. So going back to our presentation. Okay, so I want to cover off now the request detail. This is quite an important part of the process for yourselves and for us as well. The detail that you supply in there needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be, as we've mentioned already a number of times, needs to be clear, needs to tell us where the issues come from. It needs to tell us how you've come to the definition that you've got, and it needs to be understandable and clear. And the website also has some guidelines on what to include. Information required by LINZ. Okay. So some of the things that we would like to see in a request, and you don't have, it's not a matter of using all these, pick and choose depending on your situation. If you're talking about issues with an existing parcel, tell us what the parcel ID is. Give us the plan references, like one of the examples we showed before where the surveyor had actually said, I've done this definition based on these two plans to get the position of the road. Please shift Landonline. Node IDs, don't go overboard with this, just the ones that are important or enough to give us a flavour of what you're asking. Like if you need stuff shifted to eliminate distortion, significant distortion, give us enough IDs to point us in the right direction. Confirmation that any nodes to be shifted are not already survey accurate. That means, are there any cadastral vectors in Landonline between the nodes you want shifted? You can do this investigation yourselves in the spatial search screen by turning on the cadastral vectors layer and the underlying marks, and you'll see if there are vectors there. If there are, it's going to change the method that we use at the exception processing end. Just let us know whether any nodes you want shifted have vectors for them. Explanation of why the boundaries need to be shifted. This is the most important thing, why. And then any details from the captured data that we need to line up with. So, that about covers it for this morning, folks. Just wanted to say a big thanks again for giving up your time. We really appreciate it. We know you're busy, and I just want to thank you for the questions that you've submitted, and just to let you know that the ones that we haven't been able to answer online, we're going to follow up with the authors if we can get back to you. And please, if you wouldn't mind just spending a moment or two just to go to the poll tab on Slido and just answer that question and submit it for us to see, just getting an idea of our audience, of the kind of experience you've got, so that we can tailor these sessions going forward. But thank you very much. I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas, and go forth and prosper.